Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. Dr. Nolan Pierce stared through the viewport of the diplomatic vessel Harmony as the swirling emerald planet of Verithra grew larger in the distance. After 15 years of long-range communications, humanity was finally making first physical contact with the reptilian Verithrans. "Nervous, Doctor?" Captain Fiona Reeves asked, appearing beside him. Nolan adjusted his glasses, a habit he maintained despite corrective surgery. "Excited, actually. 15 years studying their language and customs from transmissions, and now I'll finally meet them face to face." As the ship's senior xenobiologist and cultural liaison, Nolan had devoted his career to understanding the Verithrans. Their society was complex, hierarchical yet deeply community-oriented, with traditions dating back thousands of years. "Just remember," Captain Reeves said, "this meeting could determine Earth's relationship with their species for generations. The diplomatic team is counting on your expertise." "No pressure," Nolan muttered as the landing sequence began. The Verithran welcoming committee was impressive, 7 tall, emerald-scaled figures with elegant crests and long, muscular tails. Their ambassador, Threll, approached with arms opened in the traditional greeting gesture Nolan recognized from video communications. "Welcome, humans of Earth," Threll's voice resonated with a musical quality that the translation devices couldn't fully capture. "We are honored by your presence on Verithra." Nolan stepped forward as practiced, responding in carefully pronounced Verithran. "The honor is ours, Ambassador Threll. We come seeking friendship between our worlds." The assembled Verithrans trilled in appreciation at his effort, their crests rising in what Nolan recognized as pleasure. So far, so good. The delegation was escorted to the capital city of Shandara, a sprawling metropolis of twisted spires and living architecture where buildings seemed to grow rather than be constructed. Plants and structures existed in perfect symbiosis, technology and nature intertwined. "The High Council awaits," Threll announced as they approached the central governmental complex, a massive dome covered in luminescent foliage. "They are eager to meet the humans who have traveled so far." Inside the council chamber, 7 Verithrans sat in a semicircle on elevated platforms. Their scales shimmered with iridescent patterns that Nolan recognized as status markings. At the center sat head counselor Visk, flanked by senior members including Jelana, whose emerald scales were accented with gold patterns marking her as both council member and spiritual leader. The human delegation was instructed to approach the center of the chamber for formal introductions. Captain Reeves led, followed by the diplomatic officers and Nolan at the rear. As introductions progressed, Nolan concentrated on cultural protocol, mentally reviewing the complex hierarchical greetings. Everything was proceeding perfectly until a small native creature, something like a cross between a lizard and a squirrel, darted across the chamber floor directly in his path. Nolan sidestepped quickly to avoid the creature, not noticing that Counselor Jelana had moved her tail to the precise spot where his foot landed. The pressure of his boot on her sensitive tail was slight, but the reaction was immediate. The entire chamber fell silent. Jelana's crest flared, her eyes widening in what might have been shock or outrage, Nolan couldn't tell which. I'm sorry," he stammered, stepping back quickly. "It was an accident." Instead of anger, the council chamber erupted in a chorus of trilling sounds that the translator struggled to interpret. Ambassador Threll's expression was unreadable as he approached Nolan. "Dr. Pierce," he said quietly, "do you understand what has just occurred?" "I stepped on Counselor Jelana's tail," Nolan replied, feeling cold dread settle in his stomach. "A grave insult, I imagine. Please convey my deepest apologies." Threll's head tilted, his crest rippling in what Nolan now recognized as amusement. "Not an insult, Dr. Pierce. You have initiated the ritual of bonding, an ancient proposal tradition. By Verithran law, you have asked for Counselor Jelana's hand in marriage." Nolan felt the blood drain from his face. That can't be right. Our cultural briefings never mentioned." "It is an ancient custom," Threll explained, "rarely practiced in modern times, but still binding under our sacred laws." The deliberate step on a potential mate's tail is a show of dominance balanced by vulnerability, as the stepped upon may choose to strike or accept. Nolan looked at Jelana, who had risen from her council seat. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, her scales catching the light as she approached. Her expression was inscrutable. "Ambassador," Captain Reeves interjected, "there's clearly been a misunderstanding." Dr. Pierce meant no such proposal. Head Counselor Visk raised a hand for silence. "Intention is immaterial." The act was witnessed by the full council. Under Verithran law, Dr. Pierce and Counselor Jelana are now bonded in the first stage of marriage. The human delegation erupted in concerned whispers while Nolan stood frozen in place. This was precisely the type of cultural incident he had trained to prevent. Jelana spoke for the first time, her voice deeper than Nolan had expected. "Our laws provide a path forward. The human may prove his worthiness through the 3 trials of union or formally reject the bond, though rejection carries its own consequences." "What consequences?" Captain Reeves asked sharply. "Rejection of a council member would constitute a grave insult to our people," Visk explained. "Such an act would likely end diplomatic relations before they truly begin." Nolan found his voice at last. "And these trials? What do they entail?" Jelana's gaze fell upon him, her vertical pupils narrowing slightly. "Tests of strength, wisdom, and compatibility. Many Verithrans attempt them. Few succeed." "And if I fail?" Nolan asked. "Then the bond is dissolved with honor maintained on both sides," she replied. Nolan looked at Captain Reeves, whose expression clearly communicated that this situation had spiraled far beyond normal diplomatic parameters. The mission was hanging by a thread. "I'll undertake the trials," Nolan said before he could second-guess himself. Murmurs of surprise came from both delegations. Jelana's crest fluttered in what might have been surprise or respect. "Then it is settled," Visk announced. "The first trial begins at dawn tomorrow. Until then, our guests will be shown to their accommodations." As they were escorted from the chamber, Captain Reeves gripped Nolan's arm. "What were you thinking, Doctor? You've just agreed to marry an alien council member." "I'm thinking about our mission," Nolan replied quietly. "And right now, I'm apparently all that stands between diplomatic success and complete failure." He looked back at Jelana, who was watching him with unreadable golden eyes. The Verithran guest quarters were luxurious by any standard, living walls pulsed with bioluminescence that adjusted to match Nolan's circadian rhythm, and the air was infused with subtle oxygen enrichment for human comfort. Yet Nolan couldn't appreciate any of it as he paced the floor, reviewing Verithran cultural texts on his tablet. "You've been at this for hours," Dr. Priya Lakshmi, the expedition's medical officer, said as she scanned him with a medical tricorder. "Your stress levels are through the roof." "I'm about to undertake alien marriage trials that no human has ever attempted," Nolan replied without looking up. "Stress seems appropriate." Captain Reeves entered with Ambassador Threll. "We've been discussing options with the Verithran Diplomatic Corps," she said. "There might be a way to extract you from this situation." Nolan looked up hopefully, but Threll's expression dampened his optimism. "While technically possible," Threll explained, "refusing the trials now would require invoking the clause of incompatible species, effectively declaring humans and Verithrans fundamentally incapable of understanding each other. Which would undermine our entire diplomatic mission," Nolan finished. "Precisely." Threll's tail swished in what Nolan had learned indicated regret. "I must also inform you that Counselor Jelana holds significant influence. Her spiritual role makes her the keeper of our most sacred traditions." A soft chime interrupted them, a Verithran attendant announcing dawn was approaching. Nolan took a deep breath and stood. "Then I'd better not keep her waiting." The first trial took place in the Temple of Endurance, an ancient stone structure at the edge of a vast crimson desert. A crowd of Verithrans had gathered to witness the unprecedented event, a human attempting their sacred ritual. Jelana awaited him at the temple entrance, dressed in ceremonial armor that accentuated her powerful form. Up close, Nolan noticed intricate patterns etched into her scales and the intelligence in her golden eyes. "The first trial tests physical endurance," she explained. "We will cross the crimson wastes to the sanctuary of ancestors. The journey is 17 kilometers through harsh terrain." Nolan nodded, grateful for his expedition training. "What are the rules?" "We must remain within sight of each other at all times. If either falls behind and loses sight of the other, both fail." She handed him a small container. "Apply this to exposed skin. Our suns are harsher than yours." As they set out into the desert, Nolan quickly understood the challenge. The twin suns of Varithra beat down mercilessly, and the terrain shifted unpredictably between sharp rock formations and treacherous sand pits. Jelana moved with natural grace, her body evolved for this environment. Nolan struggled to keep pace, careful to maintain visual contact as required. "Your determination is admirable," Jelana commented after several hours, the first word she'd spoken since they began. "Most Varithrans would have requested rest by now. Is that permission to take a break?" Nolan asked through parched lips. Her crest rippled in what he now recognized as amusement. "It is an observation, not permission. The choice is yours." Nolan chose to continue, though every muscle protested. As they progressed, he noticed Jelana subtly adjusting her pace, not enough to appear deliberately accommodating but enough that he could maintain the required distance. "May I ask a personal question?" he ventured during a particularly challenging climb up a rocky incline. "You may ask," she replied, her tone neutral. "How do you feel about being suddenly bound to an alien through an accidental ritual?" Jelana paused, her tail shifting thoughtfully. "Our traditions teach that there are no accidents in matters of bonding. The universe arranges such encounters for reasons beyond our understanding." "That's surprisingly romantic for a culture that begins courtship by stepping on tails," Nolan observed. Her laugh was unexpected, a melodious trilling that echoed across the desert. "Perhaps humans and Varithrans have more in common than either suspects." By midday, the heat had become nearly unbearable. Nolan's water supply was dwindling despite his careful rationing. Just as he was calculating how much farther they could go, the ground beneath him gave way, a sinkhole opening where solid sand had appeared moments before. He plunged downward, barely managing to grasp the edge of the pit. Loose sand crumbled under his fingers as he struggled for purchase. "Jelana," he called out, unsure if she had seen his predicament. In an instant, she was there, her powerful tail wrapping around his wrist as she pulled him to safety with surprising strength. They collapsed on solid ground, Nolan gasping for breath. "Thank you," he managed after a moment. Jelana studied him with an intensity that made him self-conscious. "You called my name," she observed. "Not for help, but to ensure I knew where you were, so I would not lose sight of you and fail the trial." Nolan hadn't considered his motivations in that moment of panic, but she was right. "I guess I did. Most would prioritize their own survival above the trial's success," she said, her crest rippling with what might have been respect. They resumed their journey, but something had shifted between them. Jelana began pointing out features of the landscape, explaining their significance in Varithran culture. Nolan shared observations about the biological adaptations he noticed in the desert flora. As the sanctuary of ancestors came into view, a crystalline structure that seemed to grow from the red rock itself, Nolan felt an unexpected sense of accomplishment. "We have completed the first trial," Jelana announced formally as they crossed the threshold. Few partnerships reached this sanctuary together on their first attempt. Inside, they were met by Varithran elders who performed a cleansing ritual with scented oils and chanted in an ancient dialect the translator couldn't fully interpret. Nolan submitted to the process, understanding its importance even if he couldn't comprehend the words. Later, as they returned to the city by transport vehicle rather than on foot, Nolan found the courage to ask the question that had been troubling him. "What happens if we complete all 3 trials?" Jelana's expression grew solemn. "Then we would be bound as mates under Varithran law. A binding that cannot be broken." And if that's not what either of us wants? Her golden eyes studied him carefully. Is that not what you want, Dr. Pierce? Before Nolan could formulate a response, they arrived at the central governmental complex where Captain Reeves and the diplomatic team awaited anxiously. You passed, Captain Reeves stated, relief evident in her voice. The first trial, Nolan clarified. There are still 2 more. Ambassador Threll approached, his manner grave. Dar. Pierce, while you were undertaking the trial, we received concerning news. A faction of Verithran traditionalists has filed a formal protest against the proceedings. They claim an alien cannot meaningfully participate in sacred rituals. What does that mean for the diplomatic mission? Nolan asked. It means, Jelana interjected, that the remaining trials will be scrutinized more closely than any in our recent history. The second trial begins tomorrow, the trial of understanding. You should rest, Dr. Pierce. As she departed, Nolan couldn't help but notice a new tension in her movements. Something had changed, and he couldn't tell if it was for better or worse. We need to talk, Captain Reeves said quietly. Intelligence suggests there's more at stake here than just cultural exchange. Some factions see this accidental bonding as an opportunity, others as a threat. Nolan looked after Jelana's retreating form, suddenly aware that he had stepped into something far more complex than a simple cultural misunderstanding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and he was beginning to suspect that passing the trials might be the least of his concerns. Nolan awoke before dawn, his mind racing with questions about the upcoming trial of understanding. A soft chime at his door announced the arrival of Krell, a young Verithran assistant assigned to him. Dr. Pierce, I bring preparation materials for today's trial, Krell said, depositing a bundle of scrolls on the table. The trial of understanding requires knowledge of our history, philosophy, and customs. Nolan examined the ancient parchments covered in Verithran script. This would take weeks to study properly. You have 3 hours, Krell replied with a sympathetic flutter of his crest. Though I should not say this, many believe you are meant to fail today. Who wants me to fail? Nolan asked. Krell's voice dropped to a whisper. The traditionalist faction, led by Counselor Drazen. They view your accidental bonding with Counselor Jelana as an affront to our sacred ways. After Krell departed, Nolan combed through the scrolls frantically, absorbing what he could. The diplomatic mission had provided extensive cultural briefings, but these scrolls contained esoteric knowledge not included in those materials. Captain Reeves arrived as Nolan was finishing. We've been doing some digging, she said without preamble. This situation goes deeper than cultural misunderstanding. Jelana belongs to the progressive faction seeking stronger ties with Earth. Her rival, Drazen, leads isolationists who want to limit contact with other species. So my stepping on her tail has become political, Nolan said with dawning comprehension. Exactly. Intelligence suggests Drazen's faction may try to sabotage the trials. Nolan was escorted to the Hall of Wisdom, an ancient library with crystalline shelves holding thousands of scrolls and artifacts. The chamber was filled with Verithrans, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Jelana waited at the center, dressed in formal robes that emphasized her status as spiritual leader. Her expression was guarded, giving Nolan no hint of her thoughts. The trial of understanding tests knowledge of our ways, she announced formally. You will answer questions posed by our council members and demonstrate comprehension of Verithran philosophy. Counselor Drazen stepped forward, his dark scales gleaming ominously. The first question, recite the 7th proclamation of unified scales. Nolan's heart sank, this hadn't been in any of the scrolls Krell provided. He was about to admit defeat when he caught Jelana's subtle tail movement, a pattern he recognized from his studies of Verithran nonverbal communication. She was giving him a hint. Drawing on his knowledge of similar cultural texts, Nolan improvised. The 7th proclamation states, as scales interlock to form protection, so must individuals interlock to form society. No scale stands alone, no citizen thrives in isolation. A murmur ran through the assembly. Drazen's crest flattened in displeasure. That is, acceptable. For the next hour, Nolan faced increasingly difficult questions. Some he knew from his studies, others he deduced from context or subtle cues from Jelana. The final question came from Drazen again. The ancient text of Vasher describes the fundamental incompatibility between warm-blooded and cold-blooded species. Explain why this doctrine prohibits meaningful bonds between humans and Varathrans. The chamber fell silent. This wasn't a test question but a political trap. Nolan glanced at Jelana, whose expression remained neutral though tension showed in her tail's rigid posture. With respect, Counselor, Nolan began carefully, I've studied the text of Vasher extensively. It speaks not of biological incompatibility but of spiritual temperature, the warmth or coldness of one's approach to life. The text actually argues that those of different temperatures can complement each other, creating balance that neither achieves alone. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Drazen's scales darkened with anger. You claim to understand our sacred texts better than we do. No, Counselor. I claim only to understand them as they were written, without the lens of current political concerns. Nolan turned to address the entire assembly. Your ancestors believed diversity strengthened your people. They sought connections with different species and civilizations. This isn't my interpretation, it's documented in your own historical records from the pre-isolation era. Head Counselor Visk stepped forward. Dr. Pierce has not only answered correctly but demonstrated true understanding of our principles. The second trial is complete. As the assembly dispersed, Jelana approached Nolan. You took a significant risk challenging Drazen directly. Sometimes understanding requires questioning, Nolan replied. Did I overstep? Her crest rippled with what he now recognized as approval. You spoke truth that many have forgotten. Come, we must prepare for the final trial tomorrow, the trial of compatibility. That evening, Nolan was summoned to a private garden where Jelana waited beside a reflecting pool. Moonlight cast her scales in silver light, transforming her appearance from formidable to ethereal. The final trial is the most difficult, she said without preamble. It tests whether two beings can truly form a lasting bond across their differences. What does it involve? Nolan asked. A mind meld through our ancient technology. Our thoughts, memories, and feelings will be shared completely. She fixed him with her golden gaze. There can be no deception, no hidden agendas. Nolan considered the implications. Complete transparency. That's intimidating. Indeed. Many Varathran couples fail at this stage. She hesitated. There is something you should know before tomorrow. My position as spiritual leader is hereditary, passed through my bloodline for generations. If we complete the trial successfully, you would not only become my mate but co-guardian of our most sacred traditions. That's a responsibility I'm not sure I'm qualified for, Nolan admitted. Perhaps. But there is more at stake than our personal situation. She lowered her voice. Drazen seeks to use our traditions to prevent further contact with Earth. If we fail tomorrow, he will claim it as proof that humans and Varathrans are fundamentally incompatible. And if we succeed? It would undermine his entire platform and strengthen the progressive faction's position. She studied his reaction. I should be clear, I did not arrange for you to step on my tail. That was genuinely accidental. But I chose to honor the tradition rather than dismiss it because I believe in cooperation between our peoples. Nolan absorbed this information, understanding now the political dimensions of his seemingly simple misstep. Why are you telling me this? Because tomorrow, you will know all my thoughts regardless. I prefer you hear my motivations from me directly. She rose to leave. Rest well, Dr. Pierce. Tomorrow will test us both in ways we cannot fully prepare for. Dawn broke with a ceremonial procession to the Temple of Unity, an ancient structure predating modern Varathran civilization. Inside, a crystalline device dominated the central chamber, two seats facing each other, connected by glowing filaments to a pulsing central core. The assembled witnesses included the human diplomatic team and the entire Verathron Council. Tension was palpable as Nolan and Jelana took their positions in the ancient chairs. The trial of compatibility will reveal all truths between the participants, Head Counselor Visk announced. If incompatibility is found, the bonding is dissolved with honor. If compatibility exists, the union becomes permanent under our laws. Counselor Drazen stepped forward. I formally object to this proceeding. A human cannot possibly share consciousness with a Verathron. Their minds are too different, their biology incompatible with our technology. Your objection is noted, Visk replied, but the ancient laws make no distinction between species. The trial will proceed. Attendants placed neural interfaces on Nolan's temples while Jelana's crest connected directly to the machine's filaments. Nolan's heart raced as the device hummed to life. Focus on breathing, Jelana advised softly. Do not resist what comes. The world dissolved around Nolan as his consciousness expanded. Suddenly, he wasn't just himself, he experienced Jelana's thoughts, memories, and emotions as if they were his own. He felt her childhood on Verithra, training in ancient traditions, the weight of responsibility as she inherited her spiritual role. He experienced her loneliness despite her elevated status, her fascination with other cultures, her genuine hope that contact with humans would revitalize Verathron society. Simultaneously, Jelana experienced his memories, his passion for xenobiology, his wonder at the diversity of life forms, the excitement and fear of this mission. She felt his confusion about their accidental bonding, his determination to represent humanity honorably, and his growing admiration for her strength and wisdom. Deeper they went, past surface thoughts into fundamental values and beliefs. Nolan experienced Verathron collective consciousness, the interconnection they felt with their ancestors and descendants. Jelana experienced human individualism, the drive for personal growth and self-determination. Through this exchange, something unexpected happened. Their differences didn't create incompatibility but complementarity. Where Jelana valued tradition, Nolan valued innovation. Where he sought new horizons, she provided grounding context. Together, they formed a perspective neither could achieve alone. As their minds intertwined, Nolan stumbled upon a hidden memory, Jelana discovering evidence that Drazen had deliberately altered historical texts to support his isolationist agenda. He had removed references to ancient Verathron alliances with other species, creating a false narrative of historical isolation. Simultaneously, Jelana discovered through Nolan's scientific knowledge that Verathron civilization was approaching a genetic bottleneck. Without new diversity, their species faced potential stagnation, something her scientific advisors had tried to tell her but that she hadn't fully comprehended until experiencing it through Nolan's understanding of genetics. When the mind meld ended, Nolan and Jelana stared at each other with new awareness. The chamber remained silent, the witnesses sensing something profound had occurred. The trial of compatibility is complete, Visk announced. The results? Jelana rose first, her voice strong. Compatibility exists between us, but more importantly, something greater has been revealed. She turned to face the assembly. Counselor Drazen has deliberately altered our historical archives to support his political agenda. Drazen's scales darkened with rage. Blasphemy. You expose sacred mind-meld revelations publicly. When they concern the welfare of our entire species, yes, Jelana replied. She gestured to Nolan. Through our shared consciousness, we have discovered multiple truths that must be addressed. Dr. Pierce, please explain what you learned about our genetic future. Nolan stood, feeling oddly confident despite the charged atmosphere. Verathron genetics show signs of decreasing diversity. Within a few generations, this could lead to increased susceptibility to disease and decreased adaptability. This pattern has been observed in numerous species across the galaxy, including historical human populations. The solution is always the same: cultural and genetic exchange with outside groups. Murmurs spread through the chamber as the implications became clear. Drazen's faction had been leading Verithra toward a path that threatened their long-term survival. This is human manipulation. Drazen protested. They seek to weaken us through dilution of our pure bloodlines. No, Nolan countered calmly. We seek partnership based on mutual benefit. The mind meld showed both Jelana and me that our peoples have complementary strengths. Together, we can achieve more than either could alone. Head Counselor Visk raised his hands for silence. The trial of compatibility has revealed truths beyond the participants themselves. This requires council deliberation. However, regarding the bonding ritual, a decision must be rendered. He turned to Nolan and Jelana. Was compatibility found? Jelana and Nolan exchanged glances. Through the mind meld, each understood the other completely, including the complicated reality of their situation. We found compatibility, Jelana stated, but of a kind not anticipated by our ancient laws. We propose a modification to the traditional bonding. What modification? Visk asked. A diplomatic union, Nolan explained. Not a personal marriage in the traditional sense, but a formal alliance between our peoples with Jelana and myself as its representatives. Our minds are compatible, our goals aligned, but we both recognize that a traditional mate bond would serve neither of us nor our peoples best at this time. The proposal caused immediate debate among the council members. Eventually, Visk called for silence again. Such a modification has no precedent, yet the principle of adaptation is core to our beliefs. He studied them both carefully. If you both agree to serve as permanent diplomatic representatives between our worlds, bound by the sacred trust revealed in your mind meld, I believe this satisfies the spirit of our traditions while creating a new path forward. One by one, the council members voiced their agreement, all except Drazen, who stormed from the chamber vowing to challenge the decision. In the aftermath, as formal diplomatic proceedings began between the human delegation and the Verithran Council, Nolan and Jelana found a moment of privacy in the garden where they had spoken the night before. So, Nolan said with a small smile, I stepped on your tail and ended up rewriting interspecies diplomacy. Not how I expected this mission to go. Jelana's crest rippled with amusement. Perhaps the universe knew what it was doing after all. What happens now? To us, I mean. We work together to build something new between our worlds. Her tail moved in a gesture he now recognized as affection. The mind meld cannot be undone. We will always carry part of each other with us. Nolan nodded, feeling the truth of her words. Their connection transcended conventional relationships, neither fully personal nor merely professional, but something uniquely their own. I'm glad I stepped on your tail, he admitted. As am I, Jelana replied. Though perhaps next time, you might simply introduce yourself first. As Verithra's twin suns set beyond the crystal spires of Shandara, human and Verithran delegations celebrated the beginning of a new alliance. At its center stood Nolan and Jelana, living proof that sometimes the greatest discoveries come from the smallest missteps.